Welcome to Wednesday night at Second Baptist Church. We're trying to love God, love people, and serve the Lord. Hope you're all having a great week. You guys all having a good week?
Yeah.
Other than the microwave issues, we're having a good week, right? And, oh yeah, I got a couple people having a rough week, so. Yeah, true, so. At least, you know.
Things in this church that doesn't work all that well either.
We're getting there. We're getting there. You know, the Lord, it's part of the adventure of life. You know, the Lord gives us those hiccups to grow us and mature us and, you know, just have a good time.
We've got utilities at our foundation now.
Hey, that's an added to our praise.
Now all we need is a trailer.
There we go. Chris Peterman's got utilities, so the trailer, I think, is on its way, right? Or is it
It's not going to be here till the 7th at the earliest. So,
7th?
yeah, that's when we get to go look at it. So it's probably going to be about the 10th or so before we get it.
There you go. Well, don't make your daughter mad. You don't want her kicking you out yet, so.
That's what I'm trying to do, behave myself.
Yeah. There you go.
That would be hard for me to do with my daughter.
We'll
Yeah,
see.
but I'm going to be homeless if I get kicked out.
There you go. You gotta behave. Gotta behave. All right. Well, if anything, I'm just glad you're all here. Whether you're having a rough week, a good week, an average week, we're glad you're here. We're doing our study. We've been really working on the basics of discipleship, the disciple life. You know, and we've been covering different topics kind of along the way. As we've talked about last week, we talked about there's only one way to heaven. We focused on the only. Why? Why is there only one way? Why Jesus is the only way? And hopefully you enjoyed that discussion last week. We covered some things. This week we're going to cover one of the topics that, a lot of people ask about and a lot of people struggle with. And that is, why does God allow suffering? Why does he allow suffering? Why is there evil in this world? Why are those things? And that's a big question that goes around for any Christian. Anyone who's out there is going to engage that at some time. And so we're going to talk about today, you may hear this question phrased many different ways. Why does God allow suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why would a good God allow evil things to happen? And this idea can be phrased a lot of times, a lot of different ways. But it all comes down to the same point. Why does God allow these things to happen? And it comes to this idea that it's called, Ravi Zacharias calls it the trilemma. Instead of the dilemma, it's a trilemma. As Christians, we have this threefold problem. First problem is this: God is all powerful, God is all loving, and evil exists. And that becomes the trilemma. And it can be beyond that if you want to. It can be quadrilemma or on, because God's many qualities. If he is all of these things, how can they all exist? How can God be all powerful and yet evil exists? How can be God all loving and evil exist? And we struggle with that. And it's fascinating because I was researching this a little bit and listening to Ravi Zacharias talk about it. He's like, this is really a Western thing. You see, he was from the East, and when he come from the East, suffering wasn't an issue for them. The different religions didn't have a problem with suffering. If you were Buddhist or you're one of the deists there, then it was just you're dealing with your karma, the debt you owe from your karma. If you were a Muslim or something like that, you were just, it's Allah's plan, so that's just the way it is. Allah's working. And so it wasn't until you come to the West where we have comfortable living compared to the rest of the world, right? We have a lot of niceties. Is that a word? It is now. We have a lot of nice things. We have a lot of comfort. And yet we are the ones in the world struggling with the idea of evil and why bad things happen. And it's a fascinating thing to think about. And now it's kind of saturating its way around the world because of the mixed thoughts and the closeness of the world now through the internet. But it really started in the West here, where we're at. So we're going to engage this. And we have this idea, and C.S. Lewis, I got this quote from C.S. Lewis that says, it's crucially important to examine the assumptions within a question. All right? And so there's my $10 word there. Our guys study, we've been dealing with lots of $10 words on Tuesday morning. But the idea is this, that when you have a question like this, when you have something, a dilemma, something like that you engage with, you need to first get to the root of the question, right? You got to break it down to what are the things that are assumed within the question, what are the things that cause you to, cause the question to be an issue, right? And because sometimes people like to ask questions and they sound really hard to answer, but when you start investigating underneath, you start realizing that it's got a basic line of assumption, and once you address the thing they've assumed, you can answer the question and move on, or engage the question at the base level instead of trying to answer, because it just sounds like a powerful question. How can a good God let bad things happen? How can God let evil happen? And when you just look at that question, it can really shake you to the bone, because it's like, wow, yeah, you're right. You start thinking about it, and it can really mislead your thoughts. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what happens. Why does God allow suffering? How do we engage that idea of suffering? Because if you haven't yet, you're going to. It's going to be it's part of life. We're going to deal with the idea of suffering, with evil, with something. So this idea all begins with our view of God. Right? This becomes the foundation of where we're at. How do you view God? And, I share my testimony a little bit. For a while, I had a view of God and Jesus as like a hippie. To me, Jesus was a hippie who just loved everybody, which he does love everybody, don't get me wrong. But he's just walking around giving the peace sign and making everybody happy. That's what he wanted. And that was the vision of Jesus I had until I started reading the New Testament and started reading it for myself and realized, wow, Jesus was angry at times. He was sarcastic at times. He was confrontational at times. Those people yes, he dined with sinners, but all those sinners knew what he stood for. And it was a different view that I had, that once I started investigating the Bible, I started learning a real view of Jesus, and it helped me grow in him. And the same thing with when we engage ideas of God. We've got to engage how we view God and who God is, because sometimes we get caught with the idea of a God in our own minds. We start creating our own God. And then people have heard this before, my God wouldn't allow that to happen, or my God wouldn't do those things. It's like, well, then maybe you made a false God. We got to find out who the one true God is. And he's not going to bend and twist to our will and our wants and the newest fad in the world, or in the Western world. And so we've got to get the idea of, what is your view of God first? What is your view? Do you believe there is a God? Because a lot of times people ask these questions to those who don't believe in God, or trying to trip you up, or trying to, kind of put a nail in your views, saying, look, oh yeah, there can't be a God because evil exists, and how can a good God exist if there's evil in the world? And they want to put an end to the idea that there is a God. But then again, it comes to the assumption there. You've got to address the assumption that there is a God. And if you believe there is a God, then you need to start rationing through what that means for a God to exist. Right? And so here's the kind of dilemma. It's God, good and evil. It's something you need to address and think about. First, if there is evil, right? Do we all believe there's evil in the world? Yes. You guys all there. You've seen it. You've been around. There is evil in the world. Well, if there's evil, then there must be good, right? Because something can't be, if you want to know if something's wrong, there must be a right to measure it by. That's why we have tape measures. If you want to know how long an inch is, you get a tape measure. You know how long a foot is, you can measure, and that is the standard in which you measure by. The same thing with good. If there's evil, then you must acknowledge that there is good. There's a standard to measure by. There has to be a straight line to measure what is straight and what is not. Right? So if there's good, then that lays forward the idea that there must be then a moral lawgiver, someone who lay that foundation, someone to make that mark, to decide what exactly is a 1 inch, I use the illustration of 1 inch because somewhere in the world, I don't remember where, is a metal rod that is exactly 1 foot long. And it's the official measurement of the world, imperial system. And so that is what 1 foot is exactly. And so anytime they want to calibrate to the exact point, they can go back to that one rod and measure the foot, or whatever length it is, and get that foundation. Same thing with different weights and measurements. There's that essential thing to go back to. And the same thing with that, with good and evil. If there is good and there's evil, then there has to be an establishment of what is good and who. Once you have an establishment of what is good, you have to identify who decided what was good. Right? And this can get a little kind of get your mind spinning a little bit if you get too much in there, but you got to get the idea that if there is good, then who decides what is good? Do we let Caitlin decide what's good? Should we let Jack?
Why?
I don't know. Richard, yeah, we can let Richard decide what's good.
Decide what's good.
But it's not what's good, is it? 'Cause-
Helping somebody open a door for them.
Yeah, that could be good. Yeah, and that's the idea that if we wouldn't
A couple
call
of times today.
do what?
A couple of times today, I went open the door.
That's good, bro. That is good. And some people want to say that, well, society should decide what's good and what's not. And, well, if you start following that down that line, societies have done some pretty horrible things. You know, there's a while, society decided in Europe that Jews were not real people, and so they could execute them. You know, they decided things like that. Euthanasia and different things like that are decided by societies, which are fallible people. They make mistakes, and those things can change. And so it comes down to who would be the perfect lawgiver? Who decides what is truly good and bad? And why is it universal? And you can chase that road. That's a whole different night of talking about how God defined what was good and what's not. I think we talked about it last month. But the idea is if there's a moral law, a moral code, a set line for what is good, and someone was there to create it, design it, set it out, you know, then that leads us to the place of a God, right? And so a God who is the moral lawgiver, a God who decides what is good and what is bad, right? And so we come to that place. We come to that foundation of that idea that there is a moral law. There is a place, a God who is over it all, who lays it out, right? I know we're deep in the weeds right now, so I want to make sure you're with me there. That's something we got to have a hold of. And some of you guys are like, well, yes, that's what I believe anyway. Like I said, we got to get back to the foundation. Yes, sir.
Well, and then I think you can add to that question is, why is there a need to even determine what is good, and why did that even come about, that you had that need to understand this is good and this is evil, and you know, where's God in that? Where is, you know, is that of His doing, or is that a reaction because evil came about?
Good thought, good thought. And in case you couldn't hear, Brad was asking, you know, why was there even a need to draw that line of what is good and bad, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Why is that need? And I'm so glad you asked, because that comes to the air of what we call choice, right? Choice. This is a fascinating thing. It becomes what we also call the love dilemma, right? The love dilemma. You may have heard this before, that God created us in the air to love Him, right? There's an idea of He created a creature to love and honor Him, to glorify Him, as we'd say in church lingo. But the problem with love is, if you do not have a choice to love, is that really love? If you do not have the freedom to choose to love, is that really love? You know, we're in the age now where they're making robots more and more human-like, right? And it's scary to watch. I mean, you go online and there's actually in Japan, they've made robots to act as comforting aids to people. So they can come in and they look human, they feel human, they comfort people. It's kind of fascinating to watch, but kind of creepy at the same time. But the thing with a robot is, all a robot can do is what it's programmed to do. Right? It only chooses it can't choose anything. It just makes decisions based on how it was programmed and how it's stimulated. So whatever the programmer puts in there is what it does. It doesn't have freedom. And that becomes the dilemma of love. You know, in order for love to happen, there must be an option to choose. Option to choose to love. Option to choose to reach. To be there to choose love and to not choose love.
That's that dangerous word, free will.
Free will. And the idea of freedom. And we say the choice, and this is long debated, so we won't go too far down this road, but we have that option there. We are held accountable for our choices on Judgment Day, and that's what we know. The Bible says we're responsible for our choice, you know, for the things we have done. And so that comes to the place of God gives man humanity the choice to love him or not love him. And again, remember we talk about love, talk about God being truth. And if you joined us for the study, we've talked about God before, that God is righteousness. He is the perfect one, right? You guys remember that, for those who are with us or online? God is perfect, and so he is what is good. And when we choose not to love him, we are now choosing not God, if that, for math people. So the idea that you're choosing what is not God. And so if God is love and God is perfection, to choose not to love God is then to choose the things that are not of God, which are, again, the line of good and bad, right and wrong. So that's the idea of sin. When we choose not to follow God, that's why it's such a big thing, because we're not just making a mistake, oops, we did something wrong. It's we're choosing against God. We're trespassing against him. And that's kind of the picture there that he uses. So technically, we're not choosing the line between right and wrong. We're choosing a line between God and not following God. Rebelling against him. That's the idea of rebelling again, to turn away from God. And that's the idea of sin. Sin is the idea of lawlessness, breaking away from God, and what is good and what is bad. And so we have that idea then that when we choose against God, we are now choosing what we call sin. Separation from God, corruption away from God. And this has multiple effects within the world. This is where bad comes, or what we call evil comes from. You guys still with me? This can get really deep, so I don't want to, you get really spinny sometimes when we talk about these. And if you don't, I watch a lot of these videos and I get lost every few minutes. But here's the idea. So we're at this place, if you're with me still, we're talking about God. God is perfect. God is right. When we choose to sin against God, we're choosing against him, choosing the ways that are not right. And that brings us to what we call evil then. That disobeying God leads us to what we call evil. And there's basic forms of evil. The first one is moral evil, right? Moral evil is crime, violence, hate, the things that are against someone else, right? And we know that, and it's fascinating because it's written in the hearts of so many people around the world because, in almost every culture in the world, it's wrong to kill somebody else. It's wrong to kill them just for no reason. Right? Even in the tribes that celebrate killing, there's a set of honor amongst the tribe, which you don't kill certain people in a certain way. There's honor amongst that. So there's rules about that. It's fascinating. Around the world, everywhere you go, there's rules against things like stealing. And there's different laws and things that different societies have all established. And it's universal. Those universal truths. And that's that moral law that God has laid out. But we choose to break that law. We choose, again, to not love God, and we choose not to love God and follow God. We disobey him. And that's where crimes come from. That's where hate comes from. That's where violence comes from, is that we're no longer choosing to follow God. So people who are not choosing to follow God are going to follow these paths of evil and wrong. The idea of moral wrong there. You guys with me on that one? So we get the idea. So if you're doing what is against God, which is morally wrong, you're creating evil in the world. Now again, if God gave someone the freedom to do that, moral law happens because you're violating somebody else. So there's always a victim in the process. There's always a victim in the process. And there's usually more than one victim. And that's the heartbreaking part of it. That's where a lot of suffering comes from, is someone chooses to do evil. They choose against God. And that brings in trouble. Right? The next one is this, natural evils. Right? We talk about natural sufferings like hurricanes and forest fires, and even though some forest fires are started by people, but the idea, there's a lot of weather phenomena, there's a lot of things, there's thorns out in this world, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why does a rose bush have to have thorns? Or why does a blackberry bush got to have thorns? Because that's, it's just good blackberries. So, Romans 8:18 says this, "For I consider that the suffering of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is going to be revealed to us. For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's Son to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it to, in the hope that the creation itself also will be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. And this is the basic idea that when man brought sin into the world, it was the earth and the world was cursed, right? That was part of Adam's curse. That no longer would he just get food for free. He would have to work the earth by the sweat of his brow, and the thorns and thistles would come forward, the weeds would come out. And so the world was cursed because of it, because of sin entering the world. You got a question, or just raise your hand? All right, good. No problem. Just don't want to let you hang in. So that's the idea of natural evil. Man's sin caused curse, caused the nature to swing against us. And, you know, some things that we call natural nature sin is, you know, we built a city below sea level. You know, we should have thought that one through. You know, anyways, we won't get into that. So, but a lot of it ties back to man. And the third one is this, social evil. A lot of people struggle with poverty. Like, you know, why is it okay? Why does God allow people to starve in Africa? And why do these, you know, why is it not fair that they don't have malaria medicine there? Or that sort of thing. And you start thinking about those social things like hunger, hopelessness, or homelessness, poverty, and that sort of thing, right? And that can make you think, wow, you know, that's not fair, is it? But if you start figuring it out, it's been said that there is enough money and food in this world to give everybody in the world, men, women, and children, 3,000 calories a day of food. Right? There's enough sustainable food in this world to give every man, woman, and child a 3,000 calorie meal. Like, so just to let you know, if I keep around 2,000 calories a day, I can keep my weight pretty good. You know, if I go too much above that, I plump up a little bit. But anyways, so 3,000 calories. So the problem is not the resources in the world. It's the distribution of resources. You see, a lot of that things, that can be settled if we can get the food to them. But the problem is we don't. 1% of the world or 10% of the world has, you know, 90% of the world's resources. And it's not God keeping food from people, it's people keeping food from people. And it comes back to a place of selfishness again. Again, sin and evil. And it ties in together that a lot of the evil in the world that we call evil is all wrapped in the selfishness of man and the results of his sin, the results of his choices. And sometimes we don't like to hear that, but that's where it all comes from, where it all lands. And so that becomes the problem then of one of the major problems with sin is evil is caused by man and man's choice to either follow God or disobey God. Right? And that wraps up, you know, the suffering. You know, if God took away our idea to choose, our freedom to choose, if he, you know, say someone's about to create a heinous crime and God steps in and makes a gun not happen, you know, or stops a car from going. An idea of why doesn't God just step in and stop these sort of things from happening? And if he does, that's going to take away a person's choice. That's going to take away that reaction. And that's one thing to engage. Now, again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't. Rabbi Zachariah shares a story. I find it fascinating. He tells a story about a farmer, a peasant man who is out, and one day his horse runs away. He has one horse, and it runs away. And his neighbor comes by and says, "Oh, it's a bad day. You lost your horse. It's gone. It's not coming back. You have no horse. What are you going to do?" And the farmer says, "Look, what do I know of these things? I don't know." The next day, the horse comes back, but it brings a herd of wild horses with it. And so now this man has a whole field full of horses. And the neighbor comes by again. "Wow, sir, look what great luck you have now. Look at the many horses you have. And it's amazing, your horse came back and brought his back." And the farmer's like, "What do I know of these things?" You know? The next day, the son's out there tending to the horses, and one of them stamps on him, breaks his leg. "Oh, what bad luck." The neighbor comes back that day. What bad luck has happened to you today? Your son has broken his leg, these wild horses have got him. I mean, what bad luck you have. The guy's like, what do I know of these things? The next day, a mob comes in, a unruly gang. You know, this is something more that we don't have in America, but other countries. This gang comes through, recruiting well-bodied men, young men, to join them in their exploits. And they come to the house and they find this boy who has a broken leg, and so they just pass on by. The neighbor comes by, oh, what luck, your son has a broken leg today. And the farmer says, what do I know of these things? And the idea is, we don't always know what happens and why it happens.
Good or bad.
Good or bad, we don't know the end outcome. We don't know.
Bad thing is gonna mob coming.
Yeah, map's coming, yes. It's all bad things. And bad things, good things. We don't know the end idea. The idea of a jigsaw puzzle.
Horses coming, with other horses.
It could have been good, could have been bad. And it's all in perspective. And again, I share another story about there's a type of disease out there in which your body breaks down your nerve receptors, so you no longer feel pain. So what do you guys think of that? Yeah, it's good, right? Wouldn't feel pain anymore. Some of you guys with sore backs are like, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, after putting flooring down on the other day, I kind of wish I didn't have any pain receptors in my back right now, but which it sounds great at the surface, but then you start hearing the stories of these people who have this disease. And if they put their hand on a hot stove, they can't feel it, so they don't know. They step on a nail and get a cut in their foot, they don't know, and then they start getting infected because they don't know they've been cut. They don't know something's wrong. When they cause more and more damage, and the idea that pain is there, just let them know something is wrong. Let them know to look into it. This idea of evil in our lives, sometimes we need to grasp a hold of that. Suffering and evil, we don't know the bigger picture. God is in charge of it all. God is not causing it to happen. God is allowing it to happen. And we need to be aware of it, that's showing us there's something wrong. Though evil's happening in the world because bad things are happening. People don't know God, and they're not following God. And that should drive us to want to bring the gospel to them. Drive us to want to reach them. You know, when we see someone who we call a drunk, and they beat their kids, and they seem like a horrible person, you know, we shouldn't say, God, why do you allow that? But say, God, that person needs you. We need to be reaching to them. That should drive our hearts to want to pour out to them, and to just minister and try and reach them for the gospel. And too many times we let things that we think are evil and bad drive us away from the people who need it most. And so we got to be aware of those things and let those evil things break our hearts and draw us closer to sharing the gospel with them. A side note, here we go, because I get this a lot too. If God created everything, then God must have created evil too, huh? God created everything. He must have created evil too.
All right,
Brad wants to jump in on this one.
I'll buy it.
You buy it? You buy it?
I'll buy it. Okay. Then are we to agree that God created Satan? Satan, an angel of the Lord, was, and you know, I know these are very debatable things.
Yeah.
But God created man, and in that creation there was no evil.
Yep.
Going back to something that you asked about early on,
Yeah.
was that choice to love him. So I guess I would counter by saying, are you indicating that man had no choice at that time before evil sin was brought about, because God did not create that sin?
Here we go.
Okay?
Come on,
now,
brother.
Now then, but if you tell me that God created Satan, who fell from heaven, and caused man to sin, then is that a byproduct of God? Okay, so, and those are things I don't know that you and I can answer.
I also think about the tree of knowledge that was put in the center of the garden. And, you know, know, if God didn't want evil, why did he even put that thing there? You know, that creates a whole nother set of
Well,
questions.
Yeah.
You know, he said, anything in the garden is yours, except that.
That and the tomatoes.
And what's the first thing they go to?
The fruit.
So,
You know,
yeah.
that's it.
But
And
it
so-
said
yeah.
that Eve seen that
It was good to eat.
it was good.
Yeah, she saw it was
For
good,
food.
good for
So-
food.
So
With that,
good
yeah.
and evil had already come into picture, good and bad.
Here you go. I'll bring it. I'm enjoying this, but we gotta head towards our prayer time. I love it. So you guys are, because you're hitting the nail on the head, is because we talked about before the idea of choice and the idea of love. And Brad's like, look, you know, God gave them choice. God created Satan, yes, but he didn't cause Adam and Eve to follow Satan. So that means he wouldn't have caused them to do evil. He gave them the choice. And as you guys are saying, he had the tree there. And they had the choice to love God and follow him, or disobey him and take what they think is good. Because I love Richard said, you know, it was good it looked good. All right, don't get me wrong, because sin, you know, looks good for a season. You can ask anyone who's recovered from alcoholism. It was fun for a season until it destroyed their life. And the idea there. And so we grasp the idea of, well, then, does evil exist? Or is it the byproduct, as I think Brad said, of a choice? And that is, like we said, the assumption of the question. Because I put forward, evil does not exist. It is just the absence of following God. Like the idea of cold. How do you measure cold? You can't. You can measure heat. Because heat is something that exists. Cold is just the absence of heat. The same way with dark.
Light and dark.
Light and dark. Dark does not exist. Dark is just the absence of light rays. The same way as evil does not truly exist as an essence. It's the byproduct of a choice. When you choose not to follow God, that is the vacuum that is left. Because God tells us to love, right? Love your neighbor. Love God. Follow him.
You mentioned three different categories. You broke down three different categories of evil. One
Yes.
of which was natural.
Yes.
All right. I think that is a discussion in itself. You know,
Oh, yeah.
and probably well beyond tonight. But so many times, you and your family live near the Missouri River.
Yep.
You're going to live now close to the Mississippi River. And so many times, people look for something, some entity, someone to blame for the flooding seasons that we have. Okay?
Yep.
That happens to impact this side of the river more than it does the other side of the river. And that's all man-made. All those things
Yeah.
are man-made.
Yep.
But we look to lay blame. Same thing with the hurricanes. Same things with
Yep.
the tornado alley that is south and west of us. It just amazes me how we look to lay blame. And
Yep.
To your point, how can a loving God allow this to happen?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I love it. You're hitting it right in the head, because nail on the head there. Lost track of my thought there. But most of those are because of our choices. Like Brad was saying, I used to work in Winfield down in the lower bottoms. And while I was working there, the flood of 2008 hit. And, I was sandbagging down in the bottoms, and the water's coming up. And I was talking to the guys, and they're like, yeah, they won't allow people to build down here anymore because it floods every couple years. It's not a new thing. And the idea that man chose to build in a place that floods all the time. I mean, man chose to build a house on Tornado Alley. That you got to expect those things. And, we want to blame, building a town below sea level. You've got to... Sometimes we want to blame God. We don't want to take responsibility for ourselves, right? And that's even going back to Adam and Eve. When they got busted, what's the first thing? Adam's like, dude, Eve did it. It's all her fault. Eve's like, the snake did it. They want to pass the blame. And that's the problem with good and evil. We want to pass the blame of our bad choices. We want to find someone to blame. And that's really the essence of this question, is we want to feel good about ourselves, feel good about humanity, and not take responsibility for our choices. Because when we look around, who's to blame for the evil in the world? And if we don't take blame ourselves, then we have to blame something else. And that's why people want to blame God, or they want to be angry at a God because they don't want to take responsibility for those things, or the people's choices against God. And so
That same farmland, or that same farmland that he complains about flooding is some of the richest farmland
Yes.
around, and some of it is just priceless. It just passes down from generation to generation. Nobody knows how much it's worth, but it's worth a lot of money.
yes, and that's my next point, as we kind of head towards our as we head towards an end here, is that, well, then why, that's good that God, allows free choice, but if he knew it was going to cause so much trouble, why did he even create us? Why did he even start this little ball rolling? And as Gary said, I don't know if you can pick it up on camera, but he talked about, well, the flood land down there is not good to build a house on, but it is great to plant crops. It's great to grow things. It's very nutrients full because of some of the things that happen down there. And God allows bad things to happen because it can grow us and strengthen us. It can help. We talked about the pain issue earlier. Pain lets us know when something's wrong. And he can show us that not following God leads to this way of destruction. And we can learn to be strong through that. You watch testimonies about people who have gone through some horrible things in their lives. And how that as they embrace through and they trust God and God strengthens them through it, they become almost superhuman to us. There's a guy out of Australia, Sydney, I think, I don't remember where, but he has no arms and legs. He was born with no arms and legs, except for some little nubs. And he's a fascinating guy. He's an inspirational speaker. And he water skis, he swims, he does all kinds of crazy things. And he talked about that he had a moment in his life where he wanted to commit suicide. He wanted to end it all because he was an armless, legless being just sitting there. He couldn't do anything. And he couldn't figure life. He thought his whole life was going to be people taking care of him. But he followed God, and God showed him that he had purpose. And he had to take what we would call a disadvantage and make it his advantage. And he started doing things. He kept trying, he kept learning, he kept stretching and falling down, and he became able to do so many different things. And that led him to be an inspirational speaker and to save lives of saying, look, don't let people get you down, don't let things get you down. Seek God in these things. There's even there's several stories like that out there. And then we who have arms and legs, we see someone who does that, and we're like, wow, if they can do that, look, what can I do? I've got 2 arms. I've got 2 legs. What can I do for them? Sometimes the pain is there to grow us stronger and to help us reach, to help us trust, to help us be closer to him. He lets us go through that hardening process. And he can accomplish so much through our lives if he allows that to happen. Now, we don't know the end of it all. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We do know there's going to be a time when we get to a place called paradise. The idea that when we die, we go to be with God in heaven, and everything's going to be revealed there. The big reveal at the end. The idea that we're going to understand it then. Right now, we live in a finite world where we don't see the end of things. We only see our little piece of the jigsaw puzzle. And it doesn't always make sense. And we always try to figure out, where does it fit in the big picture? And why is this happening to me? Why am I shaped this way? Why are these things going on? And really we need to step back and say, all right, God, you've got a bigger picture. Let me find my place to fit in. Let me find my place. Can you imagine if every jigsaw puzzle just had smooth edges? You'd never know where to put it. But the jagged edges are what help you learn how to connect the pieces together. In the same story with our life, God's made you a certain way. He's let you go through certain things in your life. And he says, someday I'm going to show you how it fits together, but right now just trust me and follow me. All right. So that's kind of the end. Got off of my notes a little bit, so that's all right. But it's great. So great discussion tonight. Hopefully, this is one of those things that it causes a lot of people to trip up in their faith and struggle with. And I hope that some of these things help you think a little bit deeper about what it means to follow God, what it means for good and evil to be out there, and what it means when suffering happens. And hopefully encourage you in that to continue to study in it and seek God through these things. All right? Any final thoughts or questions? We could spend years just discussing this, but that was all of it in a nutshell. We don't have time. We got choir, right? So we can't.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate y'all for joining us online. We're going to say goodbye to you and hope you have a great evening. I'm going to ask my assistant to push the button. If you could end it, maybe it's right there. Okay, down, down. I'm just going to push it. Here we go.